Good morning. Good evening.
Good evening, yeah, evening.
Good evening. We are so glad to have you with us for another show of Nye County. And I'm your host, Dr. Tom Waters, and I'm very glad to be with you. We've been talking about transportation for a while, but I wanted to bring everybody up to speed on exactly where we are. So I asked Susan Holecheck and Albert Bass to come back and give us some history of where we started, how we got to where we are, and what's going on for the future. First thing I'd like to do is welcome my guest, Susan. Welcome to the show, Albert.
Tom, thank you.
Welcome to the show.
So nice to be back.
Yeah. We're just glad to have you because you guys provided so much information last time. And I know that, people in the community have been asking me, well, why do we need transportation and whose idea was it and when did this start and what do we have to do? Everybody's in favor of it, but they're still asking questions. So I wanted to just ask which one of you wanted to talk and explain how we got started, where we are, the Transportation Committee. We're also going to talk about VetTran, which is transportation for veterans, but we're going to cover a lot. But let's go back into history.
Well, if I can start out with a little bit the history that I'm aware of. So when we talk about transportation, there is the Southern Nevada Transit Coalition.
Okay.
And out of the, which is actually a part of RTC or a subdivision of RTC. From the Southern Nevada Transit Board arises an organization called Silver Rider. And that is a program that operates buses within, say, Mesquite for one.
Okay.
So the Silver Rider program got started in Mesquite and was and is successful. So from my perspective, I was so happy to be able to be asked to be on the Southern Nevada Transit Board, the actual board itself. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I went on the board in 05 or 06.
Okay.
And what we wanted to do was to look at transportation as a whole. Pahrump was really drawing attention for its growth pattern. And actually at that time was, and still is, far larger than, say, Mesquite, another jurisdiction.
Sure.
And so again, when we look at jurisdictions, particularly with an active adult population and an increasing active adult population because of what they call baby boomers, we look to transit issues.
Okay.
Pahrump had no transit system. So I know that on our behalf, we started coming out. We are privileged. The Silver Rider program has a wonderful executive director, Deb, and I can never pronounce her last name, Dautenhauser. But she's very, very, very smart and really successful at these programs. And actually, Deb had secured a $150,000 grant, and we were only needing the match on that.
Okay.
And Pablo, who continues to be on the transit committee, the transportation committee, also served on the Southern Nevada Transit Board with me, and still does. I think he chairs it, actually. So again, a man of a lot of learning and a lot of history for this. But as I say, we came to Nye County on two separate occasions with, as we say, a grant in our pocket, so to speak, and just could not get the match. And so that's how long I know for a fact that people have been interested in trying to push transit forward.
Okay.
But I don't think it's, we said this last time, I say this all the time, but I don't think that we were able to get to where we are today until we brought Albert, until there was actually a mobility manager.
Now, when you say transit, you're talking about bus transportation?
Correct.
Local
Correct.
bus transportation?
Yes.
And who would benefit from this?
Well, as I say, from our perspective, sometimes we tend to look at one segment of a population.
Okay.
I talked about active adults, but really the reality is that transportation is an economic development driver.
Okay.
Many companies who want to relocate want to know if you have a way for their employees to get to work, right?
Okay.
Many people today, and our unfortunately, Nye County is one of those counties that actually falls below the poverty level on many different levels. And so we're aware that not only disabled people may need transit, but you have people who can't afford 2 vehicles, and yet both of those individuals may have to work. You may
Gotcha.
have a
Okay.
household that has 5 people in it, 2 that work and another that needs to go to the store to get groceries.
Okay.
So it covers all ranges of ages, I believe, and obviously genders as well.
You know, in Pahrump, I've seen a lot of people doing a lot of walking. So you're including these people in that.
Absolutely.
Walking on hot days, cold days, but walking, and Pahrump is pretty large.
Very large.
So having bus transportation. You know, I was talking to one woman, she talked about the legally blind. They're under 65, so they can't use the senior items, the senior transportation. They're not veterans, so they can't use veteran transportation, and yet they still need to get around.
And we actually did a talk for last week for the Nevada Council of the Blind, which had about maybe 25 or so people there. And I would say most of them would not meet that criteria.
Okay.
And that still need transportation, have transportation challenges. That's one of the reasons we went to talk to them, to let them know what the upcoming bus program at the end of the year would be available to the whole community. It doesn't discriminate against anybody. It's open to the whole community for anybody that needs a ride at any time.
Is that the reason that you started this committee?
Well, the committee's been in existence way before I came along. It started, I have documentation going back as much as 13 years working on the transportation issue and the lack of transportation for specifically Pahrump, but also for the county. I came into the position 2 years ago when I became the Southern Nevada Rural Counties Mobility Manager, focused on working on transportation issues and creating transportation programs for the community.
Okay.
And that's when I became involved with the committee and started working on, you know, what was the big challenge. And the big challenge was always the lack of public transportation. Fortunately, we had a couple of years ago Integrity Taxi step up to the plate to bring in a taxi service, and that's been very successful for the community. But we still have a huge part of the population that's still underserved and transportationally challenged, as we call them.
Yes.
Because it's still not, that's not an option for them as well.
I mean, we've looked at statistics, and just the ones that we know of, there's over 4,000 disabled people with disabilities, right? There's over 10,000 seniors. So it's really when you start looking at a population that's, say, 37, and then you start breaking those percentages apart, it really, to me, is impactful of how much transportation is needed.
Now, I know you've done some work on setting up maybe where the buses would operate, how they would operate, about how much they would cost and things like that. Do we want to talk about that now, or we want to make people wait until the next session to hear the details?
Well, I can give a little bit of that now. Actually, it would be what's called an on-demand or dollar ride service, which typically you schedule a minimum of 24 hours in advance. The bus would be available throughout the county or throughout the town of Pahrump, so there's no restrictions in the town of Pahrump. But you would call at least 24 hours in advance to schedule your ride. And again, you want to call as far in advance as you know you need a ride, because there's only 2 buses, there's only so many seats, and there's only so much availability that we can offer. Okay. So we don't want to have to be at the point where we're turning people away and saying, I'm sorry, there's just no availability at that time for that day. Is there another day that may work better for you? But it would operate 12 hours a day, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Okay.
And pretty much cover the whole town. There's no restrictions other than that.
So if somebody wanted to go to, I'm going to use Walmart or Home Depot or something else, they could just call and say, and the bus would come to their home?
Correct. Just as long as they had at least 24 hours notice to schedule that ride, to make sure that the availability is there. And
well, what you talked about too is the vastness, right, of Pahrump. And so I think the goal is to, not that they couldn't cross, but that there would be a bus that operates per se on the north side, a bus that per se operates on the south side, to help with rides.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of we'll use 372 as a divider, basically between the north and south, and the buses will be geared to those locales, but there will be crossover because somebody who lives on this side of town might need to go to something on this side of town. Okay. Well, they're not going to switch buses.
Okay.
But the primary pickups, we want to keep the individual buses dedicated to those locales in those areas.
Do you have any idea how much it might cost?
It'd probably be between $2 and $4 a ride, depending on the mileage of distance and how many miles that you need to go from one location to the other. That's typically how they're set up. So it would be a minimum of $2 and a maximum of $4. Now, for people who are seniors or the veterans, there's programs that fund the bus program, which makes up for them having to pay anything. So for them, it would be donation-based.
And also, too, we had it work in Mesquite where we had employers say, we will go ahead and be involved with bus passes so our employees can get there. So they actually funded a great percentage of the cost of.
So this is going to be really cost-effective for the people in Pahrump.
Right.
I
Well,
think
you know, aside from what Susan gave you earlier, with 4,000 people as listed as handicapped or disabled, and then we have about 10,000 seniors, but we also have 7,000 households listed at poverty level and below. So those are the types of people that we're looking to attract with this program to make sure that they can get some transportation.
So the big question now is how soon and when would we be able to implement local bus transportation in the town of Pahrump? Now, I don't want you to answer that right now because I know we're running out of time for session 1, and I want to entice our audience to come back for session 2, where we're going to be covering a lot of details. Now, we still have some time on session 1, so the main thing I want to do is emphasize that we're trying to start local bus transportation in the town of Pahrump for the people of Pahrump. And it's going to be cost effective, and it's something that can start pretty soon. And like I said, we're going to come back on session 2. These same 2 people are going to be here. They're going to be giving you a lot of details, financial, where the buses are, how they got the buses, maybe who's on the transportation committee, how long they've been on. And Susan gave a lot of that information already. As the former mayor of Mesquite, she knows a lot of that information. She also mentioned the RTC, Regional Transportation Commission.
Correct.
She didn't say what that was, but I want to emphasize Regional Transportation Commission, and they're talking about a certain region when they do that. And she'll go into more detail on that for you as well. But is there anything else you want to say just before we close out session 1?
What's the name of the, we had to change the name from Nye Rider to?
Right. Originally, we had set up Nye Rider Transit, and now we are Pahrump Rural Transit.
Pahrump Rural Transit. Remember that name because you'll hear a lot about it as we move on. And we want to again encourage you to come back for session 2. We're going to have so much more information talking about not only transportation in the town of Pahrump, but VetTran, and this is transportation for veterans. So come back, get your pencils and paper, write down all this information. And we really thank you for being with us this evening.